What's up, guys? Coming at you from Shenzhen, China, as usual. And apparently I'm on lockdown, if you believe all of the social media stories. And I suppose it really depends on your definition of lockdown. Maybe I just have a higher threshold because I live in China. A little bit of authoritarian humor. But no, really, I mean, I go over to Hong Kong on a regular basis. And of course, it's a separate administrative region. But, you know, I'm used to going through a border, having your temperature checked, sometimes having to fill out medical forms if there are situations like this going on. You know, I've driven through Tibet, 6,000 plus kilometer road trip, and you know, you've got multiple checkpoints. So again, maybe it's a threshold thing. But one thing's for sure is the exaggerations in terms of nobody's allowed to go out on the streets, nobody's allowed to leave their building. That's completely false. And there's a lot of those exaggerations going on. So from that measure, no, we're not. However, what are the things that are going on? And I'll explain that to you. So for over a week now, we've had a rule where outside vehicles are not allowed to enter building complexes if they don't live there. Now that's extended to actual visitors, walk-in visitors. And now, mind you, most people haven't been inviting friends over for social gatherings at this point in time, and we haven't either. And so I'm kind of glad that they've actually mandated that, because there are some people being a little bit irresponsible with these measures. And the same thing is going on now to enter Shenzhen. So to enter Shenzhen, you need to register in advance. And when you come in, there's probably some forms you need to fill out. You get your temperature checked. Same thing. I'm really glad about that, because we had, for as many stories as there are about people participating and trying to be responsible in terms of taking all the precautions, you also have a bunch of stories about people coming back from Wuhan, not being transparent. There was another story in, I think it was Guangming district of Shenzhen yesterday. Came back from Wuhan, walking around, no mask, and turns out he was infected. So he's implicated a lot of people. Lots of stories like that, compounded by the fact that when Chinese New Year is over, you're going to have a rush of people coming back to Shenzhen. Shenzhen is a migrant city. I mean, a lot of cities are, but especially Shenzhen, because it was a small fishing village, you know, not too long ago, relatively speaking. And that was one of my biggest concerns. When you have this big influx of people coming in, what's going to happen? So now you have to register, and now they're probably going to scrutinize, where were you? Did you pass through Hubei province? Did you pass through Wuhan? And that comforts me. The Hong Kong side, so there's a new rule in place. If you go to Hong Kong, you have to go into quarantine for 14 days. There's different mechanisms on how that works. I'm not going to get into that. But I was looking out over the Hong Kong Shenzhen Bridge today. And it was interesting because steady stream of cars, not as much as before coming to Shenzhen, but going to the Hong Kong side, very few vehicles, because, I mean, they're going to be quarantined. And I expect if this rule stays in place for a long time, you'll start to see even the traffic drying up from Hong Kong to Shenzhen, because obviously when these people are wanting to head back, they're going to have to quarantine for 14 days. The exception for bridge traffic will be taxi drivers and stuff like that, because there's a lot of taxi drivers. How the Shenzhen Bay Bridge works is you have the Hong Kong exit customs actually on the mainland physical side. So you'll have taxis coming across, dropping people off at the checkpoints, and then heading back. And those taxi drivers obviously don't need to go into quarantine because they're not actually passing through customs and technically entering China. What else is going on the ground? So in terms of Shenzhen and controls, if you do see some buildings that are kind of blocked off, there is a rule in Shenzhen, and I think probably elsewhere too. If there is a confirmed case in your building, the entire building needs to quarantine in their apartment, stay in there for 14 days. I think somebody comes around and checks your temperature and stuff like that. And that's a pretty good control to have in place, all things considered. Then stories from the ground in Shenzhen. One that concerned me yesterday was that there was a bus driver who was confirmed to have coronavirus. That's a pretty unideal situation, being cooped up in a cabin, driving people around, and now who knows how many people have been implicated. So they're trying to figure that out now. Everything else, there is another event that's happening in Shenzhen. It was supposed to happen 8 a.m. this morning. They moved it to 2 p.m. It's kind of cool. It is a DJI live stream event where there's a village here that was compromised, some sort of a small older village, and they're going to get these DJI drones and spray some kind of a disinfectant or something like that. Basically clean out, disinfect the village. And I have some stock footage I'll probably share with you guys where it shows the drones, how they use it, how they load it up, and how it sprays. But that's not from the actual Shenzhen footage. That is going to be live at 2 p.m. Hong Kong, Beijing time if you're interested in seeing them. I think you can grab it from the DJI website or their Weibo. And for everything else, I don't think there's too many other things to talk about in terms of Shenzhen. But I did want to quickly mention the story of the doctor that I shared yesterday. I got a lot of really interesting feedback on it, and some people who said, well, you know what, there is more to the story in terms of the fact that this guy did share information early, not through the proper channels, through WeChat groups, before it was confirmed, mischaracterized it, and actually the consequences would probably have been even worse overseas, potentially even losing his medical license instead of just being reprimanded, and or told to follow regular procedures. And that raises an interesting question. I still think we should call him a hero. I mean, he was on the front lines. He put himself at risk, and he paid the ultimate price. You know, he passed away. But it raises an interesting question for me, because China, from what I've seen so far, they're not really focusing that much on countering that narrative and coming back with these counter arguments, saying, well, guys, listen, here are the implications of him doing something like that. And they're just... I don't know if it's just letting people vent their frustration and anger because they need something to vent it on. This is a frustrating situation. And even, it does seem authentic, because they're even going as far as saying when he warned people, what it did was it caused them to take extra precautions. And they gave an example of one of the people in the groups that had experienced SARS before and knows personally some people who had died from SARS. And it caused them to be extra cautious. And even though they're in Wuhan, they're completely safe now because of that warning. Now, of course, there's obviously a counter-argument to that. If everybody knew that, then there might have been a mad rush and the panic might have been worse overall. But I still think we have to show our appreciation to these doctors, even if they slip up. They're putting themselves on the front line. Many of them are volunteering to go to the front lines. And it tells these medical workers that we appreciate them and we recognize the risk that they're going through. In fact, there might be a counter-argument to that too, because there are reports of other doctors who have died. I don't know the exact details for it. I was going to look it up today. Some of them might even be from exhaustion. So this is a really rough situation for them. And the counter argument might be that here are these guys who are following all the protocols to the T, following all the rules, and yet it's this guy that's being celebrated the most. So there is a potential for that. But overall, I still think recognizing these guys, especially the ones who have made the ultimate sacrifice, is really important, including the ones that aren't being put on a pedestal like this guy. And that's one of my videos before that I did go as far as thanking even the grocery store workers who are showing up and giving us a place where we can still buy our food. But these are things to think about. And no matter what side you stand on that story, testing your own argument like that, thinking about all angles, is really important. And I still hope, with what I said yesterday, that this isn't just a superficial recognition of this guy saying, okay, guys, yes, let's make him a hero. But it really does act as a event, a catalyst to ask more questions about how these mechanisms work, the communication, transparency, and all that stuff. Even if it initiates reform that has nothing to do with this guy in particular, in terms of if we came out with some new rules and those rules wouldn't necessarily help a guy like that or a situation like that if it were to happen again, but it does help in other ways, it still is a win. Because again, it acted as a catalyst to get a conversation going. And I think there are some improvements that can be made in that regard, including some of the suggestions that I made yesterday. So other than that, my kind of thoughts of the day and some updates from Shenzhen, I can't think of anything else. And I'll try to keep the daily vlogging up. It's getting a little bit difficult because now I've got to help the kids with their homework. All of their assignments are being given to them through the internet and through these online platforms, because school is obviously not starting yet. And we don't know when it will be. Businesses included, and I'll probably share some more stories about the businesses and some of the concerns in that regard in tomorrow's video. So until then, as usual, stay safe, take all the precautions that you need to take, and I will catch you next time.